Hello and welcome to this workshop on setting boundaries, mastering the art of setting boundaries. It's a practical workshop. My name is Katrine Horn and I'm a life coach, and I help my clients set those boundaries that will allow them to be more of who they really are, getting rid of that protective layer so that they can be out there in the world and really enjoy being who they are without feeling fearful of being hurt or criticized or any of those dreadful things. If you're here live, feel free to participate in the chat. If you're watching the replay or if you're over on LinkedIn, welcome too. And feel free to comment below on YouTube too. I'm always thrilled to be listening to you. So if you think that you're out of control in your relationships, at home, at work, with your family, friends, colleagues, you could be right. If you believe that people don't listen to you, don't respect you, or perhaps even take advantage of you, you could also be right. If you think you have to put your foot down, demand respect, or give orders, you most certainly are wrong. You don't have to do any of those three things to be respected and appreciated for who it is you are. It all starts with taking responsibility, both for setting your boundaries, but also for the consequences of setting those boundaries. And I think that is where it gets to be a little bit tricky. When you take responsibility, you also take control. And that is so good to know. You can't have the control without taking the responsibility. And that is what I'm going to walk you through. As Brené Brown says, it's about being clear to be kind. She says, clear is kind, meaning that in our communication, when we are clear, it's always preferable to try to sort of hide your real intentions in either your behavior or your language. Clear is kind. So setting in place boundaries is not about expecting other people to change. It's about taking that responsibility, take that control back, and being willing to live with the consequences. If you haven't got time to stay the whole talk, the whole workshop, I'm going to put a link in the chat where you can go ahead and book your free consultation with me. So that is if you're ready to really get to work on your boundaries so that you can be more of who it is you really are and enjoy being that person. I'll talk more about that at the end, but if you're pressed for time, please go ahead and book a consultation. And if you're here and you've got a whole half hour, please stay and feel free to ask any question. If you're here, I suspect that is because you want to learn what the work involves in setting boundaries. And I'm going to really show you 3 points. And the first one is how to recognize or notice when your boundaries are not respected and then pinpoint the problem really precisely. Then I'm going to go into how you can set those effective, kind, caring, loving, gracious boundaries that you can feel good about. That will allow you to be, number 3, more of the person you really are, so you can be her because you're getting rid of the protection that you've put in place to protect the real person that you are, and you are able to be more of her because you've got those clear, kind, and gracious boundaries in place. So to illustrate that, let me first of all tell you a story about me and why those boundaries are so important to me, because there was a time where I just dropped all my boundaries. In fact, I was so unaware of the whole phenomenon of setting boundaries and drawing a line in the sand and protecting myself and my space. And I let somebody walk completely all over me. And that really left a scar for a long time. And can I just say that I think this can really happen to anybody, because I used to think of myself as a strong woman, and I still do, or I do again today. But we can put ourselves in some very vulnerable situations. And that is when we let our boundaries sort of float. We get very imprecise on where it is our boundaries are. So let me tell you this story of me living in France without really speaking French, without having any friends, without having my usual network, no family and all of that, being pretty much on my own. I put myself in that vulnerable position, well, to experience something new, really. And I did, and that was lovely. But I started questioning everything around that. So instead of knowing myself to be like open-hearted and easy to communicate with, to be with, sort of an easygoing person, I learned from this unhealthy relationship I got into that I was very dependent and weak. And somehow I just accepted all of that. I just slowly took on how this person looked at me and adopted it to be true. And that was because I didn't have any of those boundaries in place. So I was in a different culture, and I, as a professional people pleaser, I was trying to fit in. I wanted to be sort of more French than the French, although that is not really true, but I did want to learn the language. And I was aware that I wasn't very good at speaking French. So that was a vulnerable place for me. Also, not being able to say what I really thought. All of that made me feel really, really vulnerable and open to criticism. And in this unhealthy relationship I was in, I did get criticized a lot. It was, in fact, a relationship with a narcissist, and he criticized me constantly. So even as a strong woman, the one who had emigrated to 2 foreign countries, gone to music college against all odds, done a lot of things that could be quite scary and that she felt was quite scary, but she did anyway. Even that strong woman could really get pulled down and to start to believe in that criticism. So I had to sort of, well, I didn't have to, but I took on a whole new persona, a fearful one, always on the lookout to avoid being criticized. I don't know whether that sounds familiar to any of you, but if it does, please tell me so in the chat. This idea that we have to guard ourselves, like we can't let our hair down, we can't be ourselves, for fear that somebody might pounce on us, might criticize us. So that was sort of my everyday situation. And if you can see an image of a dog, before I used to be like that bright-eyed and bushy-tailed dog, and I became the dog with the tail in between its legs, if you see what I mean. So I sort of changed personality to some extent. And all of this time, I was telling myself, yeah, you were so wrong before. This is real, and I was wrong. And I think that is also something we do when we get into narcissistic relationships, is that we make ourselves wrong. And fortunately, I left this relationship many, many years ago, I think 25 now, but it took me a long time to recover. So if I showed you this personal challenge for me, is just to relate some of the problems that you could be running into, but these are not really the only ones, these unhealthy relationships. What you can also have as a problem is overcommitment. If you don't have boundaries in place, you are apt to overcommit, meaning that you find yourself saying yes to many things you didn't really want to say yes to. You can go into overwhelm as a result, because you've committed to so many things, you don't know where to start then, and you don't know how to get it all done. Also, this leads you into denying who you really are, because you're trying to be something different. You're trying to be the person who does it all, and you're forgetting the most important point in that, the most important part, which is you. So you sort of downplay yourself and overplay the role. So I've got this theory that we've got an intrinsic value, and I'll talk about that later. We are who we are. We sometimes take on a role, or as I say, put on a mask, and become somebody a little bit different from who it is we really are. And that is what I want to prevent you from doing. Because when you do that, when you overcommit, when you feel the overwhelm, and when you start deviating from who it is you really are, you get to feel drained because there's so many demands on you. You can start feeling resentful. That's a big one for me. You can feel misunderstood, taken advantage of, and undervalued. And that is something we absolutely must prevent. And if you're already there, just know that you can get out of this situation, right? You can act. And that is why you're here today. And I'm going to show you. But as if all of this wasn't bad enough, there's even some bigger problems, because if you go on like that with the overwhelm, the overcommitment, the feeling drained and resentful and all of that, well, it could lead to burnout. Well, it probably will. But even if it doesn't, just know that you've got less of an impact at work or in your family, less of the impact that you could have if you had those sound boundaries in place. You could be earning less, right? Because you're not putting yourself forward. And as you don't really put your boundaries and uphold them, people might not recognize your real value. They might not even be aware of it. And so they don't see your potential, and you don't get the promotions really and the responsibilities that you feel you could take on. And then also, as happened with me, I got into those unhealthy or a kind of unhealthy relationship. So if these are the problems, I've also got some solutions for you, and they're really three. So I'm going to talk about three things. The first being how you can notice when you are having people overstep your boundaries, when you're slipping on your boundaries, when you're willing to let down those standards you've got for how you want to be treated. You can notice that, and noticing is really the first step. You can notice that by how you feel. When you trust your feelings, like if you're feeling sad and you trust that that is true, well, then it is you. You are accepting who you are. So our feelings are never wrong. Our interpretation of the actions or the feelings could be wrong, like the interpretation of it. But the feeling of in and of itself is always true, is always right, because feelings are, well, basically, very simply put, hormones circulating in our body. So there's no point in arguing with them. They are there. So you can tell that something is off with your boundaries if you're starting to feel sad or resentful or hurt or something like that. Then your first step is just to notice it. Notice it and not argue with it. So there are two steps to this. It's that you need to become emotionally literate. That means recognizing your emotions. And then you need to learn how to process them. Because if you don't, if you push them away, if you deny them, if you say, no, 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 I don't want to be sad, or no, 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 I'm not hurt. If you're sort of denying those feelings, they will only amplify. So you have to be able to process them in your body. As I said, emotions are hormones circulating in your body, and they won't stay circulating in your body for a long time if you don't resist them. In fact, they will hardly ever last more than a minute and a half if you can be fully present with them and just let them be there. So two keys to noticing if your boundaries are being overstepped. One is you need to become emotionally literate, and you need to be able to process your emotions instead of denying them, instead of pushing them away, ignoring them, right? So we can admit to them. It doesn't mean we succumb to them. We just recognize that they're there. And I remember once where I tried to push them away. I'm going back to that unhealthy relationship I was in. I used to be a musician, a classical musician, and I used to play the harp. And I came to Paris to study at the conservatoire, and I entered a competition, an international competition for harp playing, So obviously for the glory and for the money. And I was really chuffed with myself because it was the first time I really exposed myself to that level of competition. And lo and behold, you know what happened? I got into the finals. I got into the finals, and there were 3 of us in the finals. So this narcissistic boyfriend of mine came and told me, do you know what, Katrina? The 2 other girls, they're professional. You aren't. And I thought, oh, right. I'm not even professional. And then I started thinking, well, why am I here? That is dreadful. That is so embarrassing. What can I do? I'm just below par. There's no point to it, right? I started thinking all those fearful thoughts and then saying, no, 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 but I have to do it. I have to do it. Instead of just sitting down and crying, like I was putting a brave face on it, and I was forcing myself to go through with the competition, with the finals. And funnily enough, I didn't win, right? As you can imagine, because with those thoughts, going into a competition, like a high level competition or any competition really, well, you're not very likely to win. And if I'm telling you all of this, it could be that perhaps you can recognize that kind of self-sabotage in yourself in some of the situations that you go through, and that could be painful to you, right? Had I been able to recognize my emotions and not argue with the emotions, but with the ideas behind it and say, oh, this boyfriend, he's just ridiculous. For God's sake, I got into the finals. I can't be that bad, right? Or something much more positive like that. I just wish I had the tools in place that I have today to argue with those thoughts and then maintain my boundaries. Had I maintained my boundaries, I would have told that boyfriend to sod off, right? I would have told him, you're wrong. I might not be the best, but I'm not the worst either. And I certainly am professional. Here's the proof. I'm working as a professional therapist and making money at it. So there you go. But let me move on to some of the tools I want to share with you, really, how you can put those boundaries into place. Once you put them into place, you take control. And I think that feels good to most of us, to be in control with things that we can control, and then let go of the need to control what we can't control. So we can't control other people's behavior. And that is what we're trying to do if we start putting our foot down, complaining or demanding something or giving orders. We're trying to influence other people by telling them what to do. And that is not really us in control. We want to take that control back so that we take the responsibility for controlling the consequences. And with my clients, I work on a model which goes, if you set a boundary, you tell somebody who's doing something that you don't approve of, you tell them and then you mention what it is they're doing, and then you tell them, I will, and then you tell them how you're going to deal with it. So I'm going to give you 3 examples that might relate to you and your life. I don't know, if not, we can talk about that. But the first example is sort of one from home life. And maybe you recognize the situation. Using my model, I will say, when you leave a wet towel in your gym bag in your room, I will cancel your membership of the gym club. Or if you leave all your stuff on the kitchen counter, once a week, I will collect all of it into a bag and I will throw it all away. Right? Scary, I know. Bear with me for an instance. A work situation could be if you don't hand this report in on time at the deadline I set you, we won't use it and I will take away your bonus. Bad. So this can feel very, very daring to you? And if it is, don't even attempt to do it, right? I'm just telling you what we're working towards. Maybe you're ready to do it like that. So when we give out empty threats, it doesn't work. Telling people, oh, you mustn't do that, I will get angry, or telling them, I will cancel your membership and not doing it. Well, that is not going to work. So before you set any of these boundaries, before you tell people what you're willing to accept and what you won't accept, you have to be ready to deal with the consequences, right? And that in and of itself is a whole other situation. But just know that you can claim control over your boundaries if you call the shots when they get to be overstepped. So if you don't want your kids to leave all their stuff on the kitchen counter, tell them, and then tell them the consequence, right? You are in charge of that. You can do it, but you have to be willing to be, well, to follow through, really, right? To do the dreadful thing, to cancel the membership, to whatever. Let me tell you a story about a client of mine. She had 3 children. She was married with 3 children. And she was so upset that nobody was doing what she was telling them to do. Like, she was screaming, she was threatening, she was complaining a lot, and she just hated that version of herself. So when we got together, I told her to write a letter, not to give it to anybody, but just imagining that she got really honest with why it was she was so upset. Why was it? And she wrote this beautiful letter saying that, first of all, she didn't enjoy coming home anymore because it was just so cluttered and full of whatever was lying around. So imagine not feeling like coming home anymore. That was really not a very good feeling, right? Also, she was afraid that she was bringing up her children not to be responsible, like responsible adults, because they were not doing much at home. They were not doing the simplest things. They didn't empty the dishwasher. They didn't put their stuff away and all of that. And she thought, well, how am I going to turn them into responsible adults? And how will they find partners in life if they can't do it now? How will they be able to do it later? And also in that letter, she recognized that there was still some part of her that wanted them to need her. She was still very much attached to them still needing her because she thought it was because of her, I don't know, tidying up powers that they liked her. You know, we go into those crazy, crazy beliefs, don't we? So of course, well, no, that's another live class. That's another workshop. But so she was very honest about what it was that these boundaries were all about, why it was that she didn't enjoy coming home and all of that. And then she sat down her family. She didn't show them the letter, right? But she sat down and she told them, this is how I feel, and we need to find a solution. So could you help me be creative and come up with some solutions to these problems? How can we, for instance, ensure that everybody puts their shoes away when they come home so they're not lying around the entrance hall all the time? And to do so, she asked them to come up with some ideas of rewards, because it's not just about negative consequences, there can be positive consequences. So they came up with more trips to the swimming pool, more trips to the cinema, more pizza nights, things like that. And as a family, that really was an opportunity for them to enjoy things together, to have more trips out together and to do more stuff together. So they had to pull together, really, and remind each other to do things. And so when somebody didn't put his or her shoes away, somebody else would say, if you don't put your shoes away, we won't get to go to the cinema on Saturday, right? So that was sort of an incentive, and it was like a collective responsibility. And also, like, if you don't empty the dishwasher, we won't have pizza, right? So this collective effort really allow them to pull together. Even they came up with, if they didn't tidy their rooms, they wouldn't allow to have their friends over. So I don't think that ever happened, really, but you have to be willing to follow through on the consequences. Right? So these are some ideas of how you can set boundaries to protect your well-being. And when you are feeling good, then you feel you can be more of who it is you really are. And if you're feeling bombarded by your environment all the time, by this impression that people don't really care for you and don't do things the way you want them to be done, like they don't even take you into consideration, they're just sort of walking all over you, well, then you can't feel good. And you know what? It's really difficult to be yourself in that kind of environment. So this worked really, really well for my clients to put those firm boundaries in place, and it just changed your life. So that is one example of how you could do that. And when you do set those clear boundaries where you focus on the consequences or the rewards, then you don't have to micromanage other people's behavior. Do you see that? So you just tell them, you do this and I will do that, up to you, and then let them make the mistakes. Because all this micromanaging of other people's behavior is really exhausting, right? Is that trying to control what you cannot control? The only thing you can control here in my boundary setting model is the consequences, be they positive or negative. That is your piece of control, and that's all you can really do. So once you are able to have those boundaries in place, you can be more of who it is you really are. You can be authentic, as we say, or as I like to say sometimes, you can be genuine. And why do you want to be that? Well, if you're not, if you're like a people pleaser the way I used to be, you can see how that is zero power, because you're always modifying your behavior to please others. So you're never really being yourself, and then you have no power, because you need to get your value in how other people see you. Because if you're just left to yourself to see you, you think, oh, I've got no value. I need it to be reflected back to me. And that is, of course, all very nice. I mean, imagine being in love. I mean, how does life get better than being loved by somebody and seeing yourself with their eyes and enjoying all of that? So there's nothing wrong with that. But we also have to be able to fuel our own value, seeing our own value without it being reflected. And I think that is really, really hard, because it's about how we are. It's about who we are, our intrinsic value, I call it, and not the value in what we do for other people, not in the actions we take. So our value is in who we are and not in what we do. That's what I call the intrinsic value. And with my clients, to find out, well, who is it that they are, really, when they're not living up to expectations, when they're not overdoing, when they're not overachieving, when they're just being themselves. It's really who they are when they're with their friends, when they're not living up to anything, when they're letting down their guard, they're relaxed and rested, right? They're not on the defensive. They're not expecting and fearing criticism. They're with people who just love and accept them. That's really who we are. I like to call it who we are at our best. So it's not about how much we do, it's about who we are. And then that, knowing that that is enough. So how can you tell when you are being her and when you're not being her? Here's some questions that you can ask yourself. Well, I've got 2 questions for you. In any given situation where you're not really certain where your boundaries are, you can ask yourself, well, what would I do if there were no consequences? Or who would I be if I was sure to be loved or accepted? Right? So we're taking away the nasty consequences, and we are trying to look at who it is we would really be if there were no untowards consequences, right? So we would still be loved, we would still be accepted, and nothing bad would come of it, right? That is who we are really intrinsically in any situation. What would you be and what would you do, right? That is always good to come back to that. But you might not feel brave enough to be that person in all situations, and that is okay. We are all works in progress, right? In some situations, we are triggered, right? We are so fearful that we can't be ourselves. We self-protect. So we become somebody slightly different, and we modify our behaviors, and we say things we didn't really mean to say, and we're sort of unsure of ourselves. And that is when we say we step out of our power. But nobody's perfect. So just recognizing what it is you would do and who you would be in any given situation without taking any action on it, just recognizing, oh, I'm deviating a little bit from who I really am, from my true self. Well, that is okay if you notice it, because if you notice it, well, that's already some learning potential here. You recognize it. So afterwards, you can ask yourself, well, why did I do that? Where am I not feeling safe? What made me do that? Or what made me say that? Right? And you can examine that and you can learn from it. And I think it's not, I mean, very few people, I think, in the world are always genuinely themselves, no matter, right? We all sometimes get a little bit off kilter. And I think that is okay, but let's notice. Let's notice. And when we notice, we don't have to take any action. It's just the insight that will help us, right? We just notice it and take notes, really. That is like our first step to changing it. And it can be enough. It can be enough to next time not do it the same way. So it takes courage to be yourself, because I think it opens us up to criticism. And if we're being criticized when we're being really our true self, it means three things. First of all, it means it's not the mask, it's not the role you're playing that's being criticized, it's you, right? So that is one fear. It's also difficult to believe in our own value when other people are not reflecting it back to us. That is really difficult to believe I'm okay, I'm good enough when somebody's telling us we're not. Also, that this has us question the value. We put ourselves into too much question, right? We question what we could be certain of. Had we had time to really solidify that. And I think these three things makes it really, really scary to be ourselves. And we need courage and we need support with that. So we always need to focus on our intrinsic value over the value that is in our actions. And of course, we are valuable for the actions we take. But that is an extra, right? We've got the intrinsic value, our value, us just being us. That is already amazing, right? And it is difficult to be certain of that if other people tell us the opposite. So I'm sure you can see the power behind you knowing your intrinsic value without having to do anything, without having to modify yourself. That is really power. And people will understand that. People will respect you for it, right? They will listen so much more closely. And I've got a really good example of that because I started out my professional life as a musician, but then I became a teacher. And I learned so much from being a teacher. Like I was teaching, or as I like to say, I was inflicting English on innocent little French children. And I was coming out of that relationship that was really narcissistic. And I thought I had to play a role. And even as a musician on stage, I'd always been playing a role. So it came really natural to me to think, oh, now I have to play the role of a competent teacher. And I really tried so hard, but children are so clever. Like they just saw right through me. And they showed me that that was completely unacceptable. They just wouldn't have it. They wouldn't have any other version of me than my real self, my genuine, my authentic, my best self. They wouldn't have it. So I had to become vulnerable. Like I had to expose my real person to them for them to give me the respect I wanted, right? For them to listen to me, to pay attention, to learn. I had to be myself. And that was such a valuable lesson I learned. It took me a long time, but I really learned it. And I think that is so important. We can all do that. We can all allow ourselves to be as true to ourselves as possible, right? It really is worth it. So, sorry. Let me recap what I've been talking about. When you don't set boundaries, you've got no control. You're trying to micromanage people, and that doesn't work because you can't control what other people do. You can only control what you do. So if you've got no boundaries in place, you're trying to control people, you start feeling powerless because it's not happening the way you want it to be happening. So that is one thing. You can't make people do what you want them to do. This could be holding you back in your relationships, right? Really holding you back. If you're trying to micromanage people in your personal relationships or in your work relationships, your career, you could be not having the responsibilities that you really deem yourself capable of. People could sort of be overlooking you, and they could not be taking you seriously because you, first of all, don't take yourself seriously because you've not got your boundaries in place. So you can set your boundaries from a sense of worthiness, from your genuine, authentic self, the intrinsic value, remember, because you don't have to compensate a lack of self-worth by needing other people to reflect your worth back to you. So you are certain of who you are and the value there is in that. So I hope that makes sense. And I want to invite you, if you want to explore more of your intrinsic value, if you want to feel how that can be enough, and if you want to come to find out how that would impact your relationships, then please book a consultation. I would love to show you. Maybe I could just put the link in the chat again, and you can just go ahead and book a consultation. If you come to a consultation, we'll have a look at the boundaries you've got in place or how you're setting them and what is not working and what, more importantly, could be working if you did it differently. So it's a completely free consultation where you come and I will show you, I will show you why it is that you're not setting the boundaries that you could put in place and that would protect your real self, and how that would allow you to be your real self or more of your real self. And then we'll put in place some strategies that you could start working on, like some really simple action steps that you could agree to take or not. I mean, I'm not forcing you to take any action you don't want to take, but being really clear on a simple plan to support you in being more of who it is you are, support you in having the courage both to set the boundaries and to follow through on them so that you can be more of who you are. Do you see how it works? You set the boundaries, you have really firm boundaries in place, and then you can be more of who it is you are. So I think it's a question of feeling safe in it. Now, you can't be yourself when you're not feeling safe. So you need to take a look at your relationships, and relationships are not carved in stone. Like when we change, the relationship changes. Like I often say that it's like a scale. So if you change one side, well, the other side is bound to change too, right? And I would love for you to feel so safe in being yourself that you really can have those relationships I think we all crave, like the really profound ones, the nourishing ones, the open ones, the ones where you feel so safe that you could do anything. Really, I mean, I was going to say it's like a mother and child. I think a child can do anything and the mother will still love them. I mean, in 99% of cases. And I think we all deserve that kind of relationship with our closest friends and family, don't you? So if you come to consultation, we'll get rid of that self-doubt, like those places where you can't see your intrinsic value, where you're not convinced that being you is enough in any situation. So if you've got any people-pleasing tendencies or perfectionistic tendencies, like I used to have all of that in a very large share, it's really interesting to pick that apart and then to see who it is that you are beyond that, if you see what I mean. Does that make sense? So just remember that that best version of you is the one where you can be relaxed, rested, not on the defensive, just enjoying the moment. And I think that's another key, really. How can you enjoy the moment? How can you be just satisfied with the right here, right now? It's really worth thinking about. So go ahead, let me know if you've booked your session. I'd love to know. And if you're watching the replay, I will post the link somewhere around here, somewhere around this video. Also, if you are on Zoom, it means you'll get an email with the replay. I will put the link in the email going out with the replay. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to contact me, DM me or email me. And I'm looking forward to seeing you sometime soon again. Bye for now.